If there is a standard narrative that has holes in it, then without a doubt, it is the standard narrative of 9/11. Never has a building collapsed on its own. World Trade Center 7. World Trade Center 7, by the way, no airplane hit it, right? Multiple countries were invaded. 1 million people died. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't our ummah that was involved. Tucker Carlson brought up the Israeli, spies dancing as they filmed. Who would have ever thought that Gaza would have brought about this change?
The ongoing atrocities in Gaza has made the world question US foreign policy and its toxic relationship with Israel. In this searching interview, I speak with Dr Yasir Qadhi, one of the most prominent US Imams, about how Muslims have to shape this narrative as Israel's iron wall of propaganda collapses.
Gaza is, of course, I think, the most important issue of our time.
America sells its Apache jets, it sells its bombs, it sells its weaponry. The notion that the secular is somehow neutral, this is a complete myth.
There is a growing feeling of a pro-Palestine feeling, and that's reflected in Tucker Carlson's various interviews. Marjorie Taylor Greene, who would have thought?
Without America, Israel could not continue.
We're here in Texas with Dr Yasir Qadhi. Dr Yasir Qadhi, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome to the Thinking Muslim.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's my pleasure to be on again.
Jazakallah khair. Well, thank you for coming into our Texas standing studio here. Jazakallah khair to Brother Mahmoud Ansari for providing us this space. Now, I arrived on Friday and I went to your khutbah at Epic Masjid, and alhamdulillah, I heard a really fabulous, amazing khutbah on Gaza. And I must say that, there have been some very consistent voices on Gaza, and you're one of those who've called out the hypocrisy and the genocide. And I want to focus a lot of our conversation today on Gaza in particular, but also, I suppose, the status of the American Muslim community in response to Gaza, as well as maybe a broader conversation about American foreign policy, inshallah. So, Jazakallah khair. Thank you for once again coming back into the studio for this conversation. Now, let me start the conversation by laying out, I think, what I feel to be some foundational ideas about Islam, the West, and our need to preserve and build. Gaza is, of course, I think, the most important issue of our time, and I think I got that sense from the khutbah I listened to, and I advise all of our viewers to go back to your Friday khutbah. You are an American Muslim. How much do you blame US foreign policy for what is taking place to our brothers and sisters?
How much do I blame? Well, let's take a step back here. Let's begin with some basics. First and foremost, in terms of financial aid, the American government has given far and above the largest sums of money to Israel since its inception. Estimates are upwards of $150 billion. $150 billion have been given in financial aid to one country alone. If you were to combine all the other countries that America gives aid to, it wouldn't even come close. So one country is getting the lion's share. Additionally, Israel is supplied the top leading weapons. America sells its Apache jets, it sells its bombs, it sells its weaponry, and it sells its infrastructure. In other words, people don't understand. It's not just that you sell the weapons and they do it as they please. No, it's the updating, it's the monitoring, it's the servicing. America has contracts directly with Israel. In fact, the technology to spy on the people of Gaza, the artillery, the satellites, the drones, all of this, it is actually America that is directly feeding, as we speak, the reality of life in Gaza. In fact, there are plenty of evidences to suggest that it is American technology that is actually telling Israeli missile operators where exactly to strike, subhanAllah. So there's a live feed that America is giving directly to Gaza. On the political front, as you're all aware, the quote-unquote 5 superpowers have the right to veto, and it is America and America alone that has gone consistently out of its way in the last 40 years to veto I kid you not, 45 times UN resolutions that were aiming to even just verbally condemn, not even to apply sanctions, just to verbally say, hey guys, you did wrong, and a tap on the wrist, right? And America stands up and quite literally vetoes resolution after resolution after resolution. According to some statistics, America has used its veto more for Israel than for any other cause. Imagine that you're actually vetoing something for another country more than you are vetoing for your own self. On top of this, this is the pre-October 7th stuff. As for post-October 7th, subhanAllah, we seek Allah's refuge, but after all of this military offensive began, rather than cut back, rather than assess, on the contrary, our government doubled down. Quite literally, the week after October 7th, then President Biden signed a bill for an additional $10 or $15 billion for Gaza. Earlier this year, President Trump signed yet another bill to sell weapons and arms. Once again, vetoes are taking place. So we see consistently, time and time again, in fact, the American politicians and media has consistently refused to use the term genocide. They are one of the main entities that are preventing even the term genocide. You're all seeing they're doing a witch hunt for the ICC, the International Court, which is the highest court in the United Nations. They're actually doing a witch hunt against the people that are attempting to call what is happening in genocide of Gaza. We can go on and on and on. So you're asking me how much of a role America is playing. I say exactly as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran regarding these people, ضُرِبَتْ عَلَيْهِمُ الذِّلَّةُ أَيْنَمَا ثُقِفُوا. Wherever they are, they shall be humiliated. إِلَّا بِحَبْلٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ وَحَبْلٍ مِّنَ النَّاسِ. Except if Allah allows, and then they have an umbilical cord with some peoples. They cannot do it themselves. They have an umbilical cord. حَبْلٍ مِّنَ النَّاسِ. The umbilical cord that the current apartheid regime of Israel has, that umbilical cord is feeding straight into our foreign policy. Therefore, without America, Israel could not even exist and sustain itself. Without America, Israel could not continue its genocide. So without a doubt, America is not just aiding and abetting. America is directly involved. And this is what makes it so difficult and problematic. Because after I've said all of that, some people are going to say, well, then why are you still in America? What is your function over here? And that is indeed a very difficult question to answer. The way to answer this question is first and foremost, and I know you didn't ask it, but it needs to be said because I brought up some very difficult points.
Well, actually,
right?
Because straight after your khutbah, I met a really lovely brother in your masjid. And he said to me he's leaving the country very soon. He's at the heart of your community. And I asked him why. Like, you're in Dallas Sharif. Why are you leaving the community? And he said, I can't bear giving my tax dollars anymore to this government that's committing a genocide. That is probably quite typical of the uneasiness a lot of people feel, especially in your congregation.
And I have been very explicit in my response to this type of scenario and question.
Yeah.
It is not obligatory to remain here or anywhere, and it is your decision. And whoever wishes to go to another place or land, that is, I have nothing positive or negative. That is a very valid paradigm to hold. And I do not criticize that paradigm. I have chosen not to. And the reason for this is, I think, needs to be made very clear. And that is that it's not that I don't acknowledge all of these negatives. I've just listed them. But when assessing where one should live, one should also take into account not just the current negatives, but the potential for positive and the potential for change. When you take that into account, this is where, and again, as of yet, these are all contextual based. Things can change. Our country is headed in a soft, fascist manner. I don't think it's going to actually get there. I think this is a little bit too, fear-mongering. I don't think America is going to become a fascist republic. I just don't see that happening. But you never know. You cannot predict the future, right? So if America remains as it is, then I'm not just looking at this long list of negatives. I'm also looking at the positives. And those positives are, frankly, outweighing for me the negatives that exist. I believe, and this is an assessment I have to answer to Allah for, I believe that I can do more for the ummah and benefit the globe and try to bring about more positive change where I am in my base over here, in my land over here. This is my country in the end of the day. I didn't choose it. I was born here. I've never had a citizenship other than that of America. I was born and raised in this country, and I recognize there are a lot of negatives, but I also recognize there are positives. And of those positives is the ability to preach the truth and the ability to effect change with very, very limited, if you like, setbacks from political entities. I can call out my own country. I can effect change within my system. I can fundraise for a myriad of causes. I can create institutions that are teaching and preaching. I can do so much. In fact, yeah, Muhammad, the reality, the bitter reality, your own podcast that you are doing, right? Which majority Muslim country would allow you to do this? What freedoms would we have in so many other places to educate, to teach the people? So my humble analysis in this regard is every person needs to make up their mind. I can't decide for other people where they should live, but you need to see what are you contributing, not just the negatives. And those people that are not contributing anything, those people that are not doing anything, and they feel that there's negatives for them and their families, Ardullahi wasi'a, go find a place and live somewhere, but realize there's no utopia on earth. No. And wherever you go, there's going to be pros and cons. So every person needs to weigh those pros and cons. By the way, also we need to make one other point, and that is the tide is changing. Survey after survey has demonstrated that the broad American public, for the first time in 70 years, the vast majority of both Democrats and Republicans, in terms of voters, are actually more sympathetic towards Palestine and Gaza than they are towards Israel. This is momentous. For me, this is not at all the time to leave. This is the time to stay and be people that effect change, be people that act as catalysts, be people that preach and teach to the masses, and keep on trying your best, because in the end of the day, one thing about this country, which again, I guess we're going to get there, is that we do have a minuscule power and potential to affect change. It is minuscule. It's frustrating. It's long-term, but it is there. And we see this already. So is this the time to stand up and leave? Because I just explained to you that our foreign policy is disastrous. Guess what? More and more Americans are waking up to this reality. And as they are, it's going to be a trickle-down effect, or a trickle-up effect in this case, where it's affecting the politicians, where slowly but surely you're going to see a change in the rhetoric and in the policies. So I look not just at the current negatives, I look at the potential for positives, and I have made an assessment for myself that it is most beneficial for me, for the sake of the ummah, for the sake of creating positive change, if I remain where I am and continue to benefit the ummah.
Assalamu alaikum. I need your help. Our videos are currently being suppressed on this platform, which means they're not appearing as frequently as they used to. In fact, over the past 2 months, there's been a significant drop in impressions. Now, experts tell us this is due to a proactive decision. To resolve this, I need you all to subscribe to this channel. Over 60% of our regular viewers are still not subscribers. And, crucially, please click on the bell notification so you don't miss any future episodes. My commitment to you is that I will continue to provide free, thought-provoking content, but I need you to spread the word, comment, and keep an eye out for our shows. Jazakallah khair.
Sheikh Yasir, earlier today I had lunch with a MAGA supporter, a young MAGA supporter, Make America Great Again, Republican, who said to me that he can barely find anyone under the age of 40 within the Republican right that support Israel today. There is a growing feeling of a pro-Palestine feeling, and that's reflected in Tucker Carlson's various interviews. Marjorie Taylor Greene, who would have thought?
Unbelievable. MTG, right? Who would have ever thought?
Right. So there is a shift. It's a very, very interesting shift. And I think actually probably, a shift that one needs to be very aware of, because that shift has the potential of changing American foreign policy to the better.
Exactly.
How much do you think Muslims are involved in shaping that opinion? Because the impression I'm getting is that this has almost been done by the right, through the right, but Muslims aren't currently really involved in that conversation. I suppose the broader question is like how much are Muslims impacting that change that you claim or you say that Muslims should be impacting in this country?
So one thing, as you know very well, is that our percentages in this country are radically different than anywhere else in Europe. And this is actually one of my pet peeves about my European brothers and sisters, that Allah has blessed them with much higher percentages of change, right? Yeah. How much can we do in this country when we are quite literally less than, realistically speaking, we're less than 1%. Max, people say, is maybe 1.21, but realistically, in terms of activist Muslims, less than 1%. America is a massive, massive continent. You know, we have 350, 60 million people. You know, so in that, the number of Muslims that are actively involved, going to the masajid, wanting to really, you know, live up to the ideals of Islam, they are qalil al-aqall al-aqall qalil. They are the few amongst, you know, such a small number. So how much can we do? Also, let me bring up again, as is typical with what I do, blunt but awkward realities. Sometimes for us to bring up a particular topic is not in our best interests. It is actually, as Allah says in the Quran, وَشَهِدَ شَاهِدٌ مِنْ أَهْلِهَا, right? A family member bore witness. Sometimes when a family member bears witness, sometimes min ahliha, sometimes when from within, when the same fact is said, right? A lot of credibility is based upon not what is said, but who says it. So let me go into a bit of a tangent here, but welcome a very, very amazing development from Tucker Carlson, from Candace Owens, and from others on the right. For the longest time, there was a topic that was considered absolutely taboo. Nobody would dare bring it up. So much so that when at a national convention, one of the senior scholars of the country did bring it up, I actually had a private conversation with him off the cuff. I mean, you know, after and I said, Sheikh, do you really think it is wise for us Muslims to mention this reality? What am I talking about? I'm talking about the very difficult questions regarding 9/11, right? That was considered to be taboo. Nobody ever spoke about the unanswered questions. And for 25 years, the way that, you know, the media and our politicians framed it, if you dare ask any questions, you are automatically labeled to be some far, you know, crazed conspiracy theorist. Guess what? In the last few months, as a result of Gaza, subhanAllah, this is one of the most bizarre, you know, repercussions. Who would have ever thought that Gaza would have brought about this change? Both Candace and Tucker, both of them, multiple times, have brought up some of the more awkward questions and said them to their entire audiences. Listen, I'm not a crazy conspiracy theorist. I'm a rational person. I have a degree in engineering. You know, I know my science. There are facts that are simply undeniable. Never in all engineering history has a skyscraper been brought down because of a plane crash. Never have fires brought down a steel reinforced skyscraper, right? Never has the Pentagon ever been attacked in all of American history, because the Pentagon is the most well-guarded fortress in the world. There is technology that's guarding the Pentagon that we don't even know about. Never has a building collapsed on its own. World Trade Center 7. World Trade Center 7, by the way, no airplane hit it, right? And it was actually, according to the official narrative, debris from across the road 400 feet away. Imagine, it's actually across the road. It's not even connected to World Trade Center 1 or 2, right? World Trade Center 7 has a free fall collapse. And what is the official, you know, story? Well, debris from World Trade Centers 1 and 2 flew hundreds of feet, and the fires continue to grow in a skyscraper until it has a free fall after a few hours, right? And by the way, in all of this, amazingly, World Trade Center 1 and 2 and 7 and the entire ground zero is destroyed. But amazingly, within a few hours, somebody finds the passport of one of the hijackers on a domestic flight. So nobody travels with a flight. So, and again, these are all facts. Tucker Carlson brought up the Israeli, you know, spies dancing as they filmed. And this isn't me. This is Tucker Carlson. Candace Owen brings this up, right? So these are facts. These are not, you know, theories. I don't have answers to these theories. I don't have answers to these facts, excuse me. How do we explain that a group of supposedly amateur people studying to fly a Cessna in Florida, right? How do we explain that all of these series of coincidences happens on one time and occasion from a group of people that forget technology? They're only armed with what? With pocket knives. For the first time, Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens and others on the right are consistently saying something doesn't make sense here. So I am saying, yeah, Muhammad, let them ask these questions. Let them, because the minute I do it or you do it, we're automatically dismissed as crazy conspiracy theorists. But it is high time that people start looking in and asking the difficult questions. Because just imagine a scenario in which it is discovered that a foreign country might have been behind 9/11. Just imagine. Imagine the repercussions in the American psyche. Imagine the immediate impact on our foreign policy. Imagine how, because listen, firstly, there's multiple. I'm an American. Leave, let's say, everything else aside. Why should my tax dollars be spent on defending another country? Why should $7 trillion have been spent in invading 3 countries, you know? Personal issue here. I don't mind saying this. You know, my father, may Allah bless him, he's 90 years old. He's not doing well now. He's on hospice care, palliative care. The healthcare system is gone. It's not taking care of my father. I have to pay through my you know, literally an arm and a leg to take care of him in his palliative state here. The healthcare system is not working. In almost every other developed country in the world, at this stage, there would be help, nurses, whatnot. In this country, nothing. Why should we be spending billions overseas as an American? As a Muslim, my religion was maligned on 9/11. What if it wasn't my co-religion is? As a person who cares about the ummah, multiple countries were invaded. 1 million people died. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't our ummah that was involved. So I have every right to want to go back and question, but I can't do it because when I do it, it's going to be deemed to be a crazy, lone conspiracy guy wanting to rethink through. And allow me to crack a joke at my own expense here. If there is a standard narrative that has holes in it, then without a doubt, it is the standard narrative of 9/11. It has massive holes in it. So the fact that, you know, Tucker and Candace are themselves rethinking through and they're starting a wave, I would say, yeah, Muhammad, let's just get out of their way and let them do their job so that hopefully we get to the answers of these very, very difficult questions that nobody has ever had the courage to verbalize, much less actually investigate. Now, obviously, as I ask all of these questions, firstly, I don't have answers to them. I mean, you know, Allah knows what all these answers are. And secondly, the tragedy of 9/11, there's no justification for it. No matter what, you know, the anger might be, whoever did it did something wrong. And it caused, you know, it wreaked havoc and killed innocent life. So there's no justification. But the only questions we have to ask ourselves is, were a bunch of people living in caves solely responsible for one of the most bizarre aspects of the last 30 years? Or perhaps was there, you know, other help? And that's really where I don't know. I put my hands up and I say, I don't want to be a crazy conspiracy theorist, but at the same time, I don't have answers to these questions.
If you're enjoying the episode, you're going to love this next clip. Assalamu alaikum, my name's Arham and I'm one of the co-hosts of our brand new project, the Thinking Youth Podcast. And to make our launch successful, we need your help. Make sure to support us by subscribing to the Thinking Youth Podcast.
I'm going to come back to Candace and Tucker in a second, but at the very beginning of that answer, you talked about numerically, the American Muslim community is not as about 1%, 1 point few percent. And in Europe, we have larger numbers. But what I've witnessed here is that, alhamdulillah, I've really found this trip, you know, interesting in the sense that I found that even though you may not have numbers, you've got real resources, you've got capital. You have got expertise here, which actually we don't have in that quantity anywhere in Europe. I just feel, and maybe I'm, you know, I don't know enough about the American Muslim community, but I'm a Brit, and that's never stopped me from talking about the American Muslim community. I feel that there's enormous resource and potential here, and I wonder whether that resource is being deployed in an effective way for Gaza and other matters.
So this is where our dichotomy comes. On the one hand, and forgive me for sounding patriotic in this sense here, in my travels throughout all of Europe and Canada and Australia, I assess the American Muslims as being miles ahead in terms of our vision and our foresight.
You think big.
Yeah. And we think strategically, and we have a bit of vision. By and large, yes, we still have those voices here and there, but by and large, you know, we are, and again, this is just factually the reality. By and large, we are better educated. It's not because of we're more smarter. It's just simply because the visas were given in America. You know, my father came on a student visa. most American Muslim immigrants, not all, but especially in the 70s, 60s, my dad came, 70s and 80s, the majority of visas were only given to students. So, and of course, as you're aware, as a Brit, in the 50s and 60s, England, the majority of visas were given to the labor class, right? And the same goes for Australia back in the 60s and 70s. This has changed now. The same goes for Canada. The same goes for Germany. The same goes for Sweden, Norway. All of these countries, post-World War II, they opened their doors not to the educated elite, but rather to the labor class. And that's, again, it's nothing to do with IQ. It's nothing. It's just the way that socio-politically it translated. So because of this, in America, by and large, the American Muslim community is highly educated. And because our parents, may Allah bless them, now I thank that when you were a teenager, you were always, pushing back, because they were adamant on education, engineering, medicine, accounting. Alhamdulillah, my generation and those younger than me, they are not in the, upper middle. They are in the top, mashallah, 5-10%. Many of them are, mashallah, very well-to-do. We have so many millionaires and multimillionaires and even billionaires, right? Go to so many of the cities and you will see this. So we have intelligence, we have capital. What we don't have is demographics and number. That is one of our biggest negatives. So with even all that you have now, you visited a number of major cities. Of course, you do realize that in the major cities, we are obviously more than 1%, right? It is estimated that in Plano and in our area, we're probably around 5%, So in our region where you are right now, it's way more. But when you go to the average town, the average city across the country, the average, little towns and whatnot, you'll hardly find a mosque or a community. We're talking about the major communities, LA, New York, Chicago, obviously Houston, Dallas. These ones, we have, alhamdulillah, good percentages. But are we doing enough? Obviously not. However, I would say, alhamdulillah, the tide is changing. We are now coming to the realization that our fathers and generation built the masajid, they built Islamic schools, may Allah bless them. Now is the time for community building of a different nature. For the very first time, we're talking about lobbying. We're talking about building think tanks. We're talking about media representation. All of this is changing, and I'm actually very optimistic. What we see in the last decade, actually in the last 2 decades, post 9/11, we are moving in leaps and bounds. So give us some time, cut us some slack, and I hope, inshallah ta'ala, within a generation, you're going to see an entire different discourse, and the rest of the Western world is looking to us as the Muslim community of America and taking from us. And may Allah Azza wa Jal allow us all to help each other in this regard.
I mean, I want to talk about ideological commitments and the ideological commitments of the American Muslim community. We've just spoken about Candace and Tucker and others, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and what seems like a move in a very positive direction from the MAGA movement, despite, of course, their Islamophobia, which still persists and exists, and what some will call like a white chauvinism that it certainly exists within some camps of that MAGA movement. But nevertheless, there is a movement that seems to be positive. And Marjorie Taylor Greene called it a genocide. Bernie Sanders has not yet even uttered the word, right?
Exactly.
So we have the right who are showing favorable political opinions towards Muslims. Now, is there a danger for the Muslim community here in building deep ideological alliances with the right?
So, yeah, Muhammad, there's always danger in aligning yourself with either of the two parties. But as you also understand, you're a political analyst. America, for the last 220 years, has been a two-party system. Unlike in many other European countries where minority parties can form coalitions and can, you guys, mashallah, are forming a third party right now in the UK, and, more power to them. May Allah bless some of the people are good Muslims involved. They want to do something. May Allah bless them in this. Excellent. People on the other side of the pond need to understand third party system in America is going to take a long time to become effective. So as you know, one of my issues is I don't like speaking in platitudes and slogans. It sounds good. I'll win brownie points. The people online will love it, and it won't get me into any trouble. But it's not going to solve any problems. So what do we do right now? There's a genocide going on.
Sure.
Do we form a third party? Of course, ideally, theoretically, utopically. Ideally, we should have our own party. Excellent. Yalla, let's form it. Now, which member of Congress will be elected from that party? In fact, let's be very candid here. How many third parties already exist? Last I checked, at least half a dozen, if not more, actually more than half a dozen. There's already third parties they've been around for decades. Not a single member of Congress, not a single senator, it has not even happened once. So do you think 1% of America, which is the Muslim community, if we were to hypothetically come together, which we're not, if we were to unite, what would a third party do? So ideally, we need to form a third party. Now, practically speaking, what can we do? We can start forming coalitions with other third party candidates to form slowly but surely a party that might begin to challenge the two-party system. But here's where we get into the devils in the details. When you start forming alliances and coalitions, what must you do? You must prioritize certain issues and neglect other issues, i.e. you must be a politician. And this is where our whole discourse takes place between idealists and between pragmatists. Yeah. Bottom line, you asked me a blunt question. Are there some inherent dangers allying ourselves with the right? Of course there are. And the most obvious one is that the right has a deep theological mistrust of us. And frankly, they have yet to overcome their racial problems as well, right? So we are brown-skinned and we are Muslims, right? And there's a deep-seated fear of the other. Because of Israel's genocide, we are very grateful that more and more people are realizing that actually the bad guys are not the Arabs and the Muslims. Yes. The bad guys are the apartheid regime. And because of the rise of LGBT and immorality, many conservative Christians are actually realizing that Muslims and Islamic values are actually in alignment with their values. And this has happened in multiple states, in Virginia, in Maryland, in Detroit, right, where the Muslims took the lead in protecting family values. And across the country, there was a positive reception. In fact, there were so many comments that said, maybe we misjudge the Muslims. If this is what they're standing for, then we need to support them. So without a doubt, I think the tide is changing. And Marjorie Taylor Greene is actually an amazing example of this, is that she is still somebody who doesn't like Islam and Muslims. And she said that. But credit must be given to her, where she actually says that no matter what your faith or religion, what is happening in Gaza is a genocide, and we need to stand with people. So I would say, given that our priority is Gaza right now, and strategic alliances, political alliances are always contextual, I would say we should, with wisdom, with caution, try to form alliances with people that are willing to cooperate with us, given that these coalitions are fragile. We should never put all of our eggs in one basket, and we should never, overestimate their affinity to us. Be wary, be careful, but we don't have much option right now other than to find voices from within, and especially the MAGA voices. There is a lot of overlap where we can agree to come together for the common good. And you never know, maybe inshallah ta'ala with our interaction, reminds me of the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, when Ibn Shahab al-Zuhri says that because the Muslims were able to interact with the non-Muslims peacefully, more people converted in that 1 year than had converted in the previous, basically 20 years. In 1 year, because of the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, more people converted than in the previous, 20 years. I am optimistic that if the MAGA crowd, if the Republican side calms down and allows us to show our true selves as religious, God-fearing folks, and they interact with us, I'm optimistic that many will actually see the beauty of our faith, and even if they don't embrace, they will actually understand that we are not enemies. Now, having said that, obviously there were always going to be red lines, and of them, I think our biggest red line, which we haven't discussed right now, is Christian Zionism. The one thing that makes America unique in the Western world, no other European country has to face what we have to face in a very fanatical branch of the Protestant party, the evangelicals, and of course there's a particular branch amongst them that would identify as Christian Zionists, right? And even Biden is theologically Zionist, right? I mean, that's one of the reasons why he did what he did. He would never have done this for any other cause. He believes in Zionism deep down inside. Now, interestingly enough, this is not universal, so JFK was a Catholic, and JFK was definitely not a Zionist. In fact, JFK was not very happy with Israel, and one of the last things he was attempting to do before he was assassinated, and rumors swirl, is there a connection or not, but let's leave that aside here because we don't want to be deemed conspiracy theorists. But one of the last things he was trying to do was to get AIPAC declared as a foreign lobbying power. That would have been a game changer, right? Because if AIPAC's declared a foreign lobby, because he was like, you're a foreign lobby, why are we allowing you to be treated as a domestic lobby, right? And he was rallying from inside to get them declared, as a foreign lobbying power. So another person that was anti-Zionist was actually Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter, his version of Christianity, he did not agree with Christian Zionism at all. Yeah. And so we have to not just label everybody together. We have to realize there are different strands. And people, like the very fact that Tucker Carlson brought an Orthodox priest, a nun, excuse me, an Orthodox nun. Yeah. And that interview is a must watch for everybody.
Amazing.
It's amazing. Yeah. And he allowed her to speak her mind. She needs to come and say, why are you calling Hamas terrorists? Yeah. I can't say that. You can't say that. She'll get away with it, right? So the tide is changing. I think we need to be cautiously optimistic that more and more people on the right side will understand that, in fact, yes, we're not exactly the same. Yeah. We do have fundamental disagreements, but overall, we do overlap on the core values of what it means to have a better society in this country and our foreign policy.
Yeah, Sheikh Yasir, I mean, are we doing enough? However, I agree with everything you've said there about the need to build coalitions with the MAGA right, because it's not only emerging as a strongly anti-Zionist, at least there's a strong anti-Zionist voice within it, but also when it comes to American foreign policy generally, the MAGA idea is that these misadventures in the Muslim world need to stop. So I think there's a really interesting, it's probably one of the most interesting philosophical ideas in American foreign and domestic policy since the Second World War. So I think we certainly need to think about that. However, yesterday I spoke to a number of Muslims, who were around 30, 40 of them. We were having a conversation about American Islam. And what they said to me is that after 9/11, Muslims, they swung to the Democrats. But because they didn't have the ideological filters in that engagement, so many of the young Muslims began to embrace progressive values. Is there a danger that we can do the same, we will do the same when it comes to the right?
Yes, there is. Like I explained, there's no ideal party for us. And we have to be mature enough to understand the only way forward is to educate our own peoples about the dangers of these alliances, even as we ally. Right. And again, I'm not a big fan of the armchair critics, as you're well aware. You can always criticize, provide an alternative. Right. You can always sit in your AC room and log online and say, everybody's wrong, everybody's misguided, everybody. Provide me an alternative. What do we do realistically and pragmatically? So after 9/11, when the Republicans started invading, at least the Democrats at that time, they were a bit more open-minded when it came to the domestic Muslim policies, right? Foreign policy, there was just a sense of like you couldn't do anything at that time. It was just a hysteria. And when people are hysterical, you cannot reason with them, right? But the Democrats were being more sensible when it came to domestic, and they clearly separated between, people that might cause harm to America versus your average American Muslim. And in that environment, let's not criminalize the past. Let's not, I think we're being overly harsh on, I lived through that, I lived through that time. What alternative did we have at that point in time? Hindsight's always 20/20. Hindsight's always, I wish I had done that, right? But let's go back in time. What would we have done? Yeah. We didn't know the future. We didn't know what's going to happen with Gaza. We didn't know that. Given the reality, I cut them a bit of slack, even though I wasn't, anywhere near as active as I am now. I was just coming back from Medina. I saw, at the time we understood that this is the better choice to make. And again, at that time, probably it was. But that's why I just said politics is all contextual. And if we have an alliance today, we can break tomorrow. Our ultimate loyalties is not to any individual, in this world, other than, obviously the Prophet ﷺ as a theological level. So I think we need to stop being so harsh within ourselves. Fi kullin khair, like let people have different tactics. There's no, Allah didn't mandate upon us one particular way. The Sahaba themselves differed about siyasa. And throughout all of early Islamic history, medieval Islamic history, you always had different ways of revival. Even now we have so many different movements. We talked about this in my previous interview with you. I am not somebody who is a naysayer, constantly bemoaning the negatives of the movements here. What do you gain? Let people have different tactics and let the best tactic win. And also realize it is not healthy to put all of our eggs in one basket. So it is actually useful for some people to have ties with groups and parties that, we might not have, the best view of them, but at least somebody's on the inside over there. So as I said, let people find the path that they think is the most beneficial. And if they are sincere and if they want to benefit the ummah, you will not find me to be overtly critical.
Okay, but I want to push you a little bit on that, because what you're calling for here, if I've understood it, is we need to have a transactional relationship with these politicians, left and right.
They have it with us. Why not?
Brilliant. Okay, so and I absolutely agree with that. However, I'm talking more about ideological commitments, because I have met Muslims today who have drunk the Kool-Aid. They believe that Islam is progressive, or they believe that Islam is right-wing, conservative. And what they mean by that is they've almost embraced the ideological convictions of the MAGA right, or they've embraced the ideological convictions of the progressive left. And I think that's a step too far. I suppose the question for you is that, from your side, how do you, as an imam of a very important community here, how do you ideologically fit the left and the right? What's your advice to young Muslims who are engaged in these conversations with the left and right?
So obviously, as Muslims, our primary ethics and laws, our primary vision of society, it is shaped from our texts. Those texts provide us the contours of what we view are right and wrong. That is our ethical life. But we must live our life in a context and an environment. So if we ally with a particular group, with a particular cause, we, the leaders of the community, should educate the next generation that, hey, listen, when you're doing so, make sure this is a red line you don't cross. We cannot be so idealistic as to say we cannot get involved with the movement if there are some negatives in it. Then you would not get involved anywhere. So both the right and the left have their problems. We will quite literally navigate context-based. Sometimes we'll have to ally with the right for some causes. Sometimes we'll have to ally with the left for some causes. And there's nothing wrong with that. We are not ideologically wed to any one camp. Both camps have pros and cons. Now, when you say that which ideology is closer to Islam, the right and the left, again, I would say that question is very, very ambiguous and open-ended. So what does Islam have to say about taxation? Is it the right or the left? What does Islam have to say about gun control? I was asked this literally in my, what does Islam say about the Second Amendment? Excuse me, what? It's like, you expect Islam to have an answer about the Second Amendment? Allah has allowed us, in an ideal Muslim state, gun control would be the purview of the people. Allah didn't legislate the Second Amendment, right? So to assume that there is a clear cut, what is the Islamic ruling on? I mean, again, in terms of business freedoms, in terms of should we tax businesses differently than whatnot? The Republicans have a policy and the Democrats have a policy. What does Islam say? The fact of the matter is, you can make an argument for both of them. Okay, a lot of people, again, they really don't understand, in my opinion, the concept of siyasa shar'iyya. And that is that, by and large, yes, there are certain things that are enshrined in the Sharia. Otherwise, siyasa sharia basically allows the Muslim polity, the Muslim rulers, to have a wide array of tools at their disposal and to decide based on what they believe is in the best interest of the community. If that is the case in a Muslim majority land, then what do you think about where we live now? What is Islam's ruling on healthcare? Tell me. I'm actually quizzing you. What is Islam's ruling on healthcare? Many people would be shocked when they discover that in the bulk of our history, do you think the average Muslim had, Norwegian healthcare given to them for free?
It's a waqf.
And who pays for the waqf?
The people.
Exactly. Yeah. When you understand this point, right, that a lot of people don't, and I want people to read history because a lot of times they have very idealized notions of the past, right? Education. Did the state pay for education for the masses? No. I mean, sure, Most states had a few nice madrasas here and there, but the average end user, most states had a bimaristan. Okay, the Mamluks had 2, 3, 5, I don't know how many, don't quote me, but the average person living in Mamluk Egypt, the average person, if they wanted to see a doctor, they'd either have to go private or they would go to a private waqf that a wealthy person might have done for the locality of that region, for example, right? The assumption that Islam has an answer for healthcare. No. Now, does that mean that in a new Islamic land we cannot have free healthcare? I would argue you can make an easy case, tax the people and have free healthcare. But your question, is Islam more aligned with the right or the left? In what area? For most of these areas, as I already explained to you, education and health and taxation, actually the Sharia allows delegation in this regard.
Can I talk to you about Western liberalism? When I mean Western liberalism, I don't mean, the Democrats and the progressives here. I'm talking about liberalism as an ideology. Do you believe there is a fundamental problem with Western liberalism, or do you believe that Muslims can take aspects of liberalism to inform our tradition?
So when you say liberalism, actually, completely coincidentally, I'm actually teaching a class right now for a young professional audience. So I'm actually going over some writings about liberalism.
Yeah.
So when you talk about liberalism, you're obviously probably referring primarily to the social norms that we consider to be liberal norms. And obviously, if you're talking about liberalism from a social perspective, from a cultural perspective, without a doubt, liberalism has some fundamental, paradigmatic differences from the Islamic system. And of them, this isn't just coming from a Muslim critique or background. One of the leading Christian philosophers of our times, political scientists of our times, Alistair McIntyre, he has brilliantly, deconstructed many of the claims of liberalism, and he demonstrates that one of the core problems out of many things, one of the things he says is that liberalism at its essence is extremely atomistic and individualistic, right? Whereas faith and community and family are given a secondary or tertiary role. Liberalism prioritizes the physical desires of the individual over the communal welfare, even of the family, right? And there are many critiques that can be given. Of them is the notion of moral relativism, is that liberalism, because there is no higher truth, we see this, that morality will constantly erode, and it's going to erode. It's not going to be, people are not going to be upgraded. Liberalism has an inherent contradiction where the claim is that it is neutral, but there is no neutrality. And there's a brilliant, I think British is Miliband, right? Is a brilliant British philosopher of our times, also religious, coming from a religious background, where he's basically saying, and of course Talal Asad is one of the names that comes to mind, the notion that the secular is somehow neutral. This is a complete myth, and we see this over and over again. The secular has to take a theological stance, a moral stance, in which it ceases to be neutral. Classic example is abortion. The secular cannot decide, because there are arguments to be made both ways. Another example, and I'm assuming your audience are all adults, so I can be explicit here, is sexual work, sex work. The arguments can be made both sides. Liberalism doesn't have, because you can say it's empowering, and you can say it's dehumanizing and debilitating, right? You can say it's exploitation. Okay, the reality of the right to offend, free speech. We see this over and over again. On the one hand, liberalism prides itself on ultimate free speech. On the other hand, it is the most prone to the cancellation culture. It's a clear dichotomy between, the theory and the lived reality of liberalism. Now, therefore, when it comes to cultural liberalism, without a doubt, there are paradigmatic differences between Islam and between cultural liberalism.
I want to mention the following statements, and I want your take on which one of them you think are correct statements to make. First statement is Islam declined when we stopped abiding by when we left Islam, or Muslims declined when we left Islam. That's statement number one. Statement number two is Islam declined or Muslims declined when we stopped progressing. Which one of these statements do you feel are the most appropriate statements according to your perspective?
Both. I don't see this as an either or.
Right.
In fact, when you say Islam declined because we stopped practicing Islam, I would say a part of Islamic civilization, which is undoubtedly, and I'm not being romanticizing of the past in this issue.
Yeah.
Early Muslims were far more open to absorbing ideas and technology than later Muslim generations were.
Right.
So for me, the two statements actually are the same statement, because fully understanding Islam means that you will be the best in deen and dunya together. There's not an either or here. And this is, I think, one of our issues and problems, is that the movements that we have today, they are either, generally speaking, focused on inner reform, right? Or they're focused on outer and, Sir Sayyid Ahmed Khan type of, philosophy. And I think that this is where the divide is taking place. The reality of our faith, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent down a template of theology, ethics, laws, rituals, and a lot of that template was literally left open for us to fine-tune from time to place, right? If we understand this, that template is there. We cannot change the template of Allah. But within, there's so many areas. Technology. Allah Azza wa Jal allowed us. اقرأ وربك الأكرم الذي علم بالقلم علم الإنسان ما لم يعلم. And early Muslims understood this. They absorbed every major technology they could find. In fact, they were the ones that excelled. I've given multiple lectures about this. The Muslims discovered the art of paper, right? The Chinese didn't understand what paper could do. The Chinese were the ones who first invented it. The Muslims saw its potential, right? And they're the ones that then mainstream paper across the globe. The same goes, the Sahaba themselves, in fact, we can even go back. The Prophet himself, he himself, when he saw the new ideas that were presented to him, he didn't say, oh, they're coming from the kuffar, we cannot accept that. Whether it was, the catapult in the incident of the Ta'if, whether it was the digging of the moat. In fact, even the norms of diplomacy, when he wrote his first letter to the emperor, right? And they said to him, Ya Rasulullah, there's a custom those guys have. And that is that you have to have a wax seal. And you have to have a special ring made. That's when he made his ring, right? Nowadays, we are still debating, imitating the kuffar, and you can't do this and you can't do that. We still have that knee-jerk reaction of assuming that absorbing the areas that Allah has allowed us to absorb from is somehow polluting or diluting our sharia. So I would say the two statements that you said are essentially the same. And that is that Islam wants us to perfect the spiritual, perfect our akhlaq and ibadat, and Islam wants us to build civilizations. رَبَّنَا آتِنَا فِي الدُّنْيَا حَسَنَةً وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ حَسَنَةً. It's not an either or.
Yeah. So I want to understand the dynamics of that, because of course you're an Islamic scholar, and when it comes to absorbing, when it comes to progressing, when it comes to changing potential fiqh opinions or developing new fiqh opinions, or even committing yourself to a new ijtihad, how do Islamic scholars go about doing that? Is it like the Christian clergy who arbitrarily update and upgrade traditional opinions? So they decide that one day, this opinion is now out of vogue, abortion or whatever it may be, and we're now going to upgrade it to, and just by the very fact that a holy clergyman says it, it now becomes new Christian law. Or are there, mechanisms that Islam asks us and asks scholars to adhere to, such that the ijtihad is based on a methodology rather than based on the whim of a particular scholar?
No, obviously, this is something that there should be no two opinions about, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has revealed to us a sharia in which there are non-negotiables. If there were no non-negotiables, then why would we need a revelation? If Allah Azza wa Jal had wanted, He could have said, okay, there is no sharia, do as you please. Then what's the purpose of revealing? In fact, why would then there even be a revelation? Without a doubt, there are non-negotiables when it comes to theology, when it comes to rituals, when it comes to law, when it comes to ethics. Everybody agrees on this that is a mainstream Muslim. And then obviously, without a doubt, there are that which are contextual based. The $1 million question, or more than $1 million, is how do we decide between the Arabic term, by the way, there's a lot of writings on this, and I encourage our viewers who know this to look up these writings. الثوابت والمتغيرات. what changes and what is non-negotiable, what is thabit, what is non-negotiable, and what is mutaghayyirat, right? So this is a small interview. This is not the time to go into usul al-fiqh and to talk about the various maxims of fiqh. Al-urfu muhakkam, culture is going to be decisive where the sharia is silent. One of the 5 maxims of fiqh, culture is going to decide where the sharia is silent, right? And so many other rulings in which, for example, Ibn al-Qayyim and others say that half of giving a fatwa is to know the context of the fatwa. And the same fatwa can change from culture to culture depending on if it is extrapolated from the nas. As obviously, if Allah says something, zina is always going to be haram. There's no 2 opinions about this, right? Khamr is always haram. There's no 2 opinions about this. But there are areas of the sharia that can change. Now, in this interview, we don't have the time to give a detailed class of usul al-fiqh. So what I will say is, given the realities that we live, and I jump to pragmatic solutions always, the end user, the listener to the interview, has no choice other than to understand there is a spectrum. And then to pray to Allah, and then use the best sincere ijtihad they have to situate themselves on the spectrum. And I don't like to do this, but there is no alternative. That really, the question the average Muslim will have to ask is, who do I trust? It all goes back to, which scholar do I trust? Because there's an entire spectrum. And Allah Azza wa Jal is not asking the layperson to become mujtahid overnight. So you have 2 options. Either you study and you find out for yourself, and it's not impossible. The beauty of our religion, anybody, male or female, can become a scholar, spend 5, 10 years, 20 years studying, no problem, right? Or Allah says, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Ask the people of knowledge if you don't know. Who are the people of knowledge? Well, that's where you are going to have to make a sincere, conscientious decision. You have to answer to Allah that, oh Allah, I didn't know. There was a whole myriad of opinions, and I made a sincere intention that I felt this person or this group of scholars really represented your religion in the finer details. You cannot use that excuse about God himself so that a Christian can say, I followed a wrong clergy. No. Belief in Allah, belief in the messenger, belief in the Quran, you have to come to yourself. Nobody can teach you, right? That's your iman. But the finer details, there is no alternative other than to choose your framework.
Yeah, can I, Dr. Yasir, I mean, I don't usually give my personal views in these interviews, but can I offer a view here, which is, there is a febrile atmosphere out there, like it or not. People, they take snippets of things that you've said. I can tell today from our conversation, they're going to take snippets from here and there, and they're going to, that's going to go viral. And what we'll end up having is, we'll end up having conversations about issues which are not really central to our big dilemma as Muslims. Gaza, for me, is a big dilemma. We have these really big issues that we have to overcome. And I agree with the point that you've made on a number of occasions that, look, Islam is a broad tent, and we certainly need to have a far more tolerant attitude towards one another, even if it's not for, even if we disagree, for the greater good. There are bigger issues that we need to be overcoming at this stage. But however, is there a responsibility from people like yourself to be guarded in the way you speak about some of these controversial issues? Because you know that there are people out there who are going to get the wrong end of the stick, or maybe even maliciously pick up on a point you say here or there and say, hey, look, Dr. Yasir Qadhi today is a conspiracy theorist, or Dr. Yasir Qadhi today believes in liberalism, or that possibly can be said from some of the answers that you've given today. Like, do you hold yourself not responsible, but to a standard where maybe, just maybe, you have to, your language has to be somewhat tamed in order to not feed that febrile social media atmosphere?
Yes, you're right. There is a bigger responsibility on me. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant me the wisdom, the ikhlas first and foremost, and then the wisdom. And I hope, inshallah ta'ala, to try to minimize the mistakes. It is impossible to be perfect in every response. And without a doubt, there have been lapses that I've made. And I ask Allah's forgiveness for that. I hope in the end of the day that the good that I do before, when I leave this world, but the good that I leave behind is much, much more than any mistakes and lapses that I've done. And I also like to state that I do find it difficult to live up to this for one simple reason, and that is that generally speaking, these types of issues that happen, they're in interviews that I'm doing. Generally speaking, the prepared talks and khatiras and khutbas and lectures that I give, they are so. What I ask then, when you find an interview of mine, you ask me 15 questions off the cuff, and I'm answering them off the cuff. Look at my ambiguity in an interview and try to match it up with something explicit in my talks. I think that's a fair request, because in a 5-minute response to your question, I cannot be expected to write every single caveat. And I have found all too often, even if I made a lapse or an ambiguity, there are plenty of lectures that I've given about similar topics where you can clearly fill in the gaps and not come to the conclusions. But what happens is, and again, perhaps maybe I shouldn't be ambiguous, but how much can I say? But perhaps also those that read in, before they read in, they should do a little bit of research and not create an entire straw man argument, not read in the worst that they can possibly read in. I also think that it's an impossible task to have to think about every single audience and every single caveat for that audience when an ambiguous question like yours, like to what level should we, apply classical madhab-based fiqh versus modern fiqh, there is no way full justice can be done. But it is a question that is of relevance to the average Muslim. So how do we then balance? I gave a generic response, and I have no doubt in that generic response, you can take a phrase or two and then create an entire straw man. But look at the track record that everybody has. Again, when it comes to, look, the only area where I think I have a little bit of right to make my own, go up on a branch, is basically aspects of Islamic theology, such as dealing with other groups or where ideas came from. Listen to my library chats. That's my PhD, my master's, is the development of Islamic theology, right? That's my expertise. That's where I feel, listen, I have the right to make a bit of a claim and prove it up. And if you agree, fine. If not, you don't agree. All other issues, I consider myself to be well-read, but I must follow somebody that I look up to. And that's not an excuse, because in the end of the day, I'm not hiding behind them. But it is only fair when somebody does criticize, is that the average layperson is not made even more confused, because the impression that is being given, which is completely wrong, is that myself or others are like forming a new fiqh or madhab. And again, the adjectives used, I must say, there should be an element of fearing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You can disagree with greater giants than me, but they are not destroying the deen. A'udhu billah. They're not like liberalizing. No, you can say we think that they're mistaken in these views. So you're creating confusion, I would say. And again, obviously, this is not a deflection. I own up to mistakes I made. But don't you think by these types of accusations, which are not true, there's a greater confusion being created unnecessarily, especially when Gaza is happening. I find all too often that a lot of times the people who are worried that I'm causing controversy are the ones who have created the controversy themselves. I'm not saying that I'm not guilty of ambiguous phrases, but there has to be a balance. And I've said this multiple times. Any sincere critic of mine, please reach out to me. My email is public. I'm sure every student of knowledge and sheikh has somebody that has a direct contact with me. I will genuinely appreciate sincere feedback. But at the time being, my brother Muhammad, we have far bigger issues than minutiae of fiqh. And even if you disagree, say, I think he's mistaken, and move on to something bigger. Let's come together to stop the genocide in Gaza. That's our biggest priority now. Let's come together to save the iman of the next generations of America. And the iman will be saved when we start preaching Islam in a positive manner rather than bickering amongst ourselves. And as you explained, and as explained as well, look at all of Islamic history. We were never unified in the minutiae of these aspects. There's always been diversity. So there will always be diversity. Live and let live, as long as we agree on the main fundamentals. Wallahu a'lam.
I agree. I mean, as I think I've said to you before, I follow and listen to most of what you've produced out there, and alhamdulillah, I find it, very refreshing. And alhamdulillah, I have never got the impression from what I've heard of you that somehow you're trying to create a new fiqh and you're, a Westerner. Quite the opposite, actually. The impression I get is very much that you're trying to grapple with the same issues that we're trying to grapple with from a different perspective, of course, from a scholarly perspective. And, you're addressing your community in a way in which you feel that community will be able to move forward with a strong Islamic identity. So I think that's, from my side, I can see that. On the issue of Gaza as well, I have to say that I think you have been, and my apologies if I'm speaking in too glowing terms here, but I think you have been very outspoken on Gaza. And I walked into your khutbah on Friday, and I was, alhamdulillah, I was really happy that we're still talking about Gaza here in Texas, in Dallas, and talking about it as a really an important thing. And in fact, that's the last question maybe I want to ask, and that is about Gaza. In that khutbah you gave, you said something quite extraordinary, I felt. You said that Gaza is actually one of the three most challenging episodes in Islamic history. You place it up there with the Mongol invasion, you place it up there with the fall of the Khilafah, right? So these are really big seismic impacts on the Ummah. Like, why have you placed Gaza on that level?
Yeah, so in the khutbah, I said that if you were to ask a historian, what are the three biggest catastrophes or, important incidents that we really would have taken as setbacks after the time of the Khulafa, after the time of the Sahaba, obviously we're not talking about the first generation. I would have said that, and again, this is relative in the sense different people are going to say different things.
Yeah.
I'm a student of history. I'm not a specialist. I like to read history. In fact, it is the main thing I'm reading these days is actually history, because for me, I just love, I feel that there's so much to benefit from it. It really broadens your horizons, makes you more tolerant, makes you more understanding. If you were to ask me, my list of the top 3 setbacks and catastrophes would have been after the time of the Khulafa and the Sahaba. Number 1, the Mongol invasion, without a doubt. That completely restructured the Ummah. Number 2, the impact of colonization and the eventual collapse of the Khilafah. And then number 3, I would say Gaza. Yeah. But each one in a different reason, for a different cause. And I mentioned this in the khutbah. As for the collapse of the invasion of the Mongols, it completely reshaped the Muslim world after the Muslim world thought that it had gone, it had died, khalas. Ibn al-Athir, the greatest historian of his generation, he literally said that the invasion of the Mongols is like an obituary of Islam. Islam is now, for me, the Islamic civilization will never rise up again. He literally thought this Qiyamah going to come. This is the invasion of Ya'juj and Ma'juj, basically. Like he thought this is the end, But subhanAllah, from the ashes of that invasion arose a whole bunch of mini superpowers that would not have risen had it not been for, the collapse of the already weak and febrile Abbasid Khilafah. And then colonization as well, without a doubt. SubhanAllah, what a tragedy for the Ummah. And yet, the impact of that has been a revival of Islamic spirit. All of these revivalist movements that we're grappling with, all of them are basically products of that generation. Beginning with the Deobandi movement, which is basically the British, the British takeover of the Mughal Empire and the collapse of the Mughal Empire, right? The Deobandi movement has done amazing work, The Salafi movement has done amazing work in reviving intellectual sciences of Islam. And their revival came, again, because of the rise of a particular entity that post-Khilafah, Look at, again, the Ikhwan and the Brotherhood and the Jamaat Islami movement. Again, directly, Rashid Rida, directly as a result of the collapse of the Khilafah. These 3 movements and their subsidiaries are basically the bulk of the Ummah that are doing revivalist work here. They all have come about because the political side went down, so the intellectual and spiritual side rose up here. Now, my point in the khutbah was the negatives at the time felt the end. But from those negatives, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allowed many positives to come. So my point was, Gaza is a negative. But insha'Allah ta'ala, we have our trust in Allah that there shall be a complete positive. Now, why would I put Gaza on this list? For very different reasons. Some would say because of the cost of life. And actually, no. We lost far more people in the Mongol invasion, and even because of colonization. I mean, in Algeria alone, because of the French, colonization, more people were brutally killed and massacred, concentration camps and rapes and all that. More people than what we are seeing, wal-'iyadhu billah. That's just in one country, right? In Algeria. So, and of course, look at India and we can go on and on. So, in terms of sheer numbers, Gaza is not at the top. And it's sad to say that because we think it, no doubt is very painful. But what it shows is, I would say, a sad reality of how ineffective 2 billion Muslims are to watch live children dying from starvation and not even being able to give them food, you know. I mean, that's just very painful as a father, as a parent. I mean, can you imagine? And you're literally calling to the cameras, you know, you're literally, the mother, the father says, Yani, feed us. I can't think of any equivalent in our history where we're literally seeing children starve and we can't even help them. So impotent that you want to scream in frustration. 50 plus countries, armies at our disposal. So to me, what this represents is a failure at a level that we haven't seen before. At least when the Mongols invaded, man, they came with weapons and horses and power. You know what I'm saying? At least the Muslims tried to fight and they failed until the Mamluks did that, you know? What do we say now when around that country there are powerful countries? And why can we blame them? Here we are as well. What do we say to that? So to me, it demonstrates an impotence, and I'm sorry to use a harsh word here, but I don't have any other word for it, right? Never in our history have we been so many. Even 100 years ago, I did my research in this regard to figure out, even 100 years ago, the Muslims were less than 10% of the world. In the last 100 years, we have gone from being 10% to being 1 out of 4 people. How can 1 out of 4 in the world allow a small little place like this in live feed to be bombed to the point of no inhabitants there and nothing is happening? So to me, it represents a different type of failure that collectively the Ummah has demonstrated that at least in a civilizational aspect, we have failed. And I say this specifically. I'm not talking about spiritually, because the Ummah is never going to die spiritually. I'm not talking about intellectually. I'm not talking about many other projects that we're doing. But what Gaza has forced me to do is to drop all political correctness. All of our Islamist movements, when I say Islamist, I don't mean political Islam, Islamic revivalist movements, whether they're Sufis, Salafis, Barelvis, Deobandis, Ikhwanis, all of them, and even mention the ones that didn't there, all of them have demonstrated civilizationally they are impotent. And to me, that means we messed up somewhere. This is my point, and I mentioned to you this in last lecture. I don't believe any one strand is the strand that Allah wants us to follow. There's good and bad in all of them. Let's stop bickering amongst ourselves. Let's understand people are created differently. Some people will want more spirituality, others will want more political activism, others will want more advanced lectures in Aqidah. So be it, as long as we're all trying to do something good. Stop being judgmental and let's come together for that. Don't we all agree that we need to feed babies in Gaza? Don't we all agree we need to stop the bombing? Don't we all agree that, you know, in the lands we live in, Muslims should be allowed to pray? In fact, so let's stop this hatred amongst ourselves and agree to disagree in a civil. I'm not saying we're the same. People have called me a relativist. People have called me that you're saying they're all. I have never said this. I'm actually excellent. In your own interview, when you mentioned Shia and Sunni, I was as explicit as can be. I don't agree with Shiite theology, but what's the point of making them the enemy right now? What's the point of harassing and intimidating and riling up the masses? What do I gain? My anger and hatred is not going to, you know, solve the Sufi, Deobandi, Salafi divide. The attributes of God are not going to be solved in our time frame. So rather than take these issues and create a big controversy and hatred and confusion, just say, you know what, maybe I don't agree with his view, but let's just come together for the greater good. And I keep on saying, let's have the discussions that need to be had about advanced things in the right audiences and gatherings, right? This is what I keep on saying. So I would say, in my estimation, Gaza is a tragedy the likes of which we have not seen in our entire history. And it should give us pause for thought and really make us understand that we have all failed. Honestly, we have all failed. And we ask Allah to forgive us, but in the end of the day, in that feeling of exasperation, let us channel that to overcompensate in our personal lives. Let us channel that to reach levels of piety we would not have reached. In fact, quite brutal honesty, let the sacrifices of Gaza inspire you to be better than what you were. And when you do so, guess what? Gaza has not lost, it has won. Because what Gaza has done, it has raised the bar of the ummah. And I want to end on this positive. In my whole life, and I'm entering now my 50 plus years, subhanAllah, on this earth, in my whole life, I have never seen the next generation more enthused about doing something, more, on a revivalist streak, more in tune with the ummah, more curious to ask questions and hear answers than I have seen because of Gaza. And so we already see one of the positives, which is bluntly, the blood of the martyrs of Gaza has revived the spirits of the ummah. And it is not they who were trapped, it is we who were trapped. Even though physically they were behind the 50-foot walls, I keep on saying, their freedoms of the soul has liberated our shackles and has allowed us to see and to actually be enthused about doing something for the ummah. So my point is indeed, don't lose hope in Allah's mercy. Ala inna nasrallahi qareeb. I am optimistic that in our lifetimes, we will see the fruits of what our brothers and sisters in Gaza have had to go through, and their sacrifices will actually be one of the causes of the revival, not just of themselves, but perhaps of the entirety of the ummah. That is my hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Dr. Yasir Qadhi, Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much for your time today.
Always a pleasure. Jazakumullah khair.
Please remember to subscribe to our social media and YouTube channels, and head over to our website thinkingmuslim.com to sign up to my weekly newsletter. Jazakallah khair.